The sunset bled across the lone cedar plains like a fading ember, trying to remember its last warmth. The horizon painted in bruised violets and tired gold, as though the sky itself had walked too many miles and longed for rest. In that trembling light moved a lone figure. Ayanna Starling, age 20, her slender body swaying with exhaustion, her deep green beaded dress carrying dust from every nameless road she had crossed. She had no family left in this world, no land to call hers, and no reason to expect kindness from strangers. Yet, when she saw the small cabin tucked against a hill of amber grass, she felt something shift inside her, a soft ache of hope she barely trusted. A tall cowboy stood at the door, broad-shouldered and still as a mountain. Wesley Rowan, age 30, and she gathered what remained of her strength to whisper, "I'm very tired. May I rest in your cabin for a while?" Before her voice thinned into the wind, like a fragile confession she feared would be refused. Wesley heard the plea before he fully understood the woman standing before him, her eyes dim with fatigue, yet bright with something unbroken beneath the sorrow. He had spent years living in silence, tending his land without complaint, quietly enduring the murmurs that he was strange or distant or too gentle for a cowboy of the West. Something about her trembling posture pierced that silence, making curiosity rise in his chest like a warm pulse he had not felt in years. He stepped closer, noticing the way her breath shivered as though she stood in front of judgment rather than a cabin door. "You can rest here," he said softly, his voice deeper than he intended, rough from disuse and nerves he did not wish to name. She looked uncertain, almost afraid to cross the threshold, as if safety was a kindness she didn't dare claim. Inside the cabin, lamplight glowed like an old memory trying to survive the dark, warming the rough Hune walls, and the small wooden table worn smooth by years of solitary meals. Ayanna entered slowly, her limbs shaking, not from fear, but from the weight of too many days spent searching for a place she would not be chased from. Wesley offered her water and a chair near the fire, watching her with a quiet reverence he didn't understand yet. She told him in fragments that she had lost her people months ago, driven from her land with no family left to speak her name, and had walked until her feet nearly bled. He listened, absorbing each word as if she were revealing the map of her heart rather than her history. Before she could finish, distant hoof-beats echoed outside, sharp and deliberate, unsettling the fragile peace settling between them. The sheriff appeared first, his badge catching the fading sun like a blade, followed by 3 townsmen whose expressions carried more suspicion than reason. They eyed Ayanna with the hostility of men trained to fear what they did not understand. Their shadows stretching into the warm doorway, as though trying to extinguish the light inside. The sheriff addressed Wesley sharply, demanding to know why he was harboring a native woman on his property. He spoke of rules, safety, and how such a thing might stir trouble among the townsfolk. Ayanna lowered her head, bracing for the rejection she had met at every turn since losing her people, shame flooding her heart before a single word was spoken. Wesley's jaw tightened, something fierce and protective rising inside him as he stepped forward without hesitation. "She's my guest," Wesley said, his voice steady but edged with something bright and unyielding. "And she stays." The sheriff's brows slammed low, disbelief flickering through his stern expression, while the townsmen muttered warnings under their breath. They told Wesley he would lose standing, that people would stop trading with him, then he'd be branded a fool for sheltering her. Ayanna stared at Wesley with wide, confused eyes, startled by a loyalty she had not expected from anyone, let alone a stranger. The sheriff finally turned away with a curse, promising consequences in the coming days. The cabin door closed behind them, sealing in a silence thick with tension, hope, and something unnamed that vibrated between the 2 souls inside. Wesley carried a kettle to the fire, his hands moving with a gentleness that spoke more than words ever could. He made her tea from dried chamomile he saved for long winter nights, placing the warm cup into her hands with a care that nearly unraveled her. Ayanna watched him quietly, seeing the way he avoided looking too long at her face, as if unsure whether he was allowed to care. The kind gestures chipped away at the wall she'd built inside herself, restoring a dignity she thought she had lost forever. Outside, the wind tapped softly at the windows, whispering of the danger still waiting beyond the cabin walls. Ayanna's voice trembled as she asked whether she should leave before her presence brought trouble to his door. He looked at her with an honesty that startled them both. "If you leave, it won't make them kinder. They already see me different than themselves." His voice wavered, revealing the shame and loneliness he had carried for years, never quite fitting in, always too quiet for the loud-blooded West. She realized then that he understood what it meant to stand alone, to be judged for simply existing. Ayanna felt something fragile but warming bloom inside her, a thought she dared not name yet. Before either of them could speak again, a loud knock thundered against the door, rattling the hinges with urgency. A group of townspeople stood outside, torches glowing like angry stars. Their faces twisted with distrust, fueled more by rumor than fact. They demanded that Ayanna leave immediately, claiming she didn't belong and would bring trouble. Their words cut through her like cold steel, echoing old wounds she had never fully healed. Wesley stepped in front of her again, shielding her from their accusations with a firmness that left her breathless. The night grew colder, as if the sky itself recoiled from the cruelty unfolding. Her vision swayed, her body too weak to carry the burden any longer, and before she could steady herself, darkness pressed in as she collapsed. Wesley caught her before she hit the floor, his arms lifting her weight as though she were made of something precious, something breakable. He laid her on his bed, covering her with a blanket worn soft from years of use. He wiped her forehead with a damp cloth, whispering small reassurances, as though he feared she might drift beyond his reach. She felt a peace she hadn't tasted in years, safe, held, cherished in the smallest of ways. When she opened her eyes hours later, dawn barely touching the edges of the room, she found Wesley asleep beside the bed, his head resting on his arm, his hand still holding hers, like a promise he didn't realize he'd made. In the gentle light of morning, something unspoken lingered between them. Ayanna rose slowly, her strength returning in quiet pieces, and helped Wesley with chores around the cabin, fetching wood, sweeping the porch, tending to the small garden behind the house. Their movements said naturally, their silences soft rather than heavy, each gesture stitching a thread of connection between them. Wesley watched her tenderly, noticing the way her presence made the cabin feel less empty, less haunted by the years he spent alone. Before either could name the shift happening between them, a rider approached the cabin with news that the town council was meeting about Wesley's refusal to send her away. The sheriff returned by afternoon, his expression carved from stone. He told Wesley plainly that the council demanded compliance. Ayanna must leave or Wesley would face the consequences, financial ruin, social exile, and the loss of everything he had built. Ayanna stepped forward, her voice soft but steady, telling Wesley that she would go voluntarily rather than bring harm to him. Her words sliced through him, revealing how deeply he already cared. Wesley took a breath that felt like a decision settling into his bones, and stepped toward her instead of the sheriff. "I'm not letting you walk away," he said quietly, not as a declaration of romance, but as a truth built from the days they had shared. Ayanna's eyes shimmered with disbelief, a fragile hope rising like a dawn she feared might disappear. Wesley's next words trembled with sincerity. He could not change the town's prejudice, but he could choose to stand beside her openly without shame or fear. So he asked her softly, reverently, if she would consider building a life with him, not because he was saving her, but because something true had taken root between them. Ayanna's breath caught, a tear slipping down her cheek as she realized she no longer wanted to walk alone. Together, They decided to marry properly before witnesses, so no one could challenge their union or her right to stay. But as preparations began, whispers of sabotage and disapproval drifted through the town like cold wind. On the morning of the ceremony, Ayanna stood in a deep green beaded dress, her long braids adorned with small feathers that caught the sun like shimmering memories of her past. Wesley stood waiting near the old oak tree by the creek, wearing a clean shirt and a new resolve carved into every line of his face. Only half the town attended, but those who came arrived with quiet respect, moved by the devotion they had witnessed. The ceremony was simple, but it held the weight of two souls choosing each other despite the world's resistance. When Wesley lifted her veil, his hand shook with emotion, and their first kiss was slow, gentle, emerging of two wounded hearts, learning how to heal together. As they walked back toward the cabin, the wind carried a sense of promise that rustled the leaves like blessings. Their life after marriage became a tapestry of soft moments that stitched their hearts tighter with each passing day. At night, Wesley held her as though she were the missing warmth he had searched for all his life, and Ayanna traced the curve of his jaw with fingers that memorized the shape of safety. She braided his hair in the evenings, and he kissed her forehead as if giving thanks for every day she stayed by his side. Slowly, the town's frostiness melted as they witnessed the sincerity of their bond. The laughter that bloomed between them, Ayanna's kindness to neighbors, the peace that radiated from Wesley's once lonely cabin. And then one evening, Ayanna felt a familiar weakness that carried a different meaning entirely. Ayanna discovered she was carrying their child, and Wesley's reaction was a mixture of stunned awe and overflowing tenderness. He held her close, his tears soaking into her hair as he whispered prayers of gratitude. Word spread through town, and where once distrust had lived, cautious acceptance now blossomed. Women brought herbs, blankets, and their own stories of motherhood. Men offered repairs to Wesley's fences and tools he lacked. The transformation was slow but real. A community learning how to replace fear with understanding. As the months passed, Ayanna's belly grew, and so did the quiet love that filled their home. Yet on the night her labor began, thunder cracked open the sky. Wesley stayed beside her, gripping her hand as she brought their daughter into the world in the soft glow of candlelight. When he held the baby, Lark Rowan, small as a fawn, and wrapped in a quilt sewn by neighbors, his heart felt too full for words. Ayanna wept softly, overwhelmed by a joy she thought life had stolen from her forever. Outside, townspeople gathered in the rain, waiting for news with a kind of collective hope that once would have been unimaginable. As dawn finally touched the horizon, gold poured through the window and painted their little family in the light of a brand new beginning. The sheriff arrived quietly, hat in hand, humility softening the lines of his stern face. He offered congratulations, acknowledging how wrong he and the town had been to judge what they did not understand. For the first time, Ayanna felt truly welcomed. Wesley stepped out onto the porch, daughter in his arms, Ayanna beside him, and together they looked over the land that had once held only loneliness for them both. The world felt different now, gentler, kinder, reshaped by love that had refused to bend. Ayanna lifted her gaze toward the horizon, remembering the evening she first arrived, weary and frightened, and how one man's kindness had rewritten the course of her life. And if you, dear reader, have ever felt turned away by the world, let this story whisper truth into your weary heart. Sometimes the path to belonging begins with a single breath of courage, a stranger's open door, or a soul who chooses to stand beside you when everyone else steps back. Home is not built from wood or stone. It is woven from loyalty, tenderness, and the quiet miracle of two lives brave enough to hold each other through the storm. And as long as there is love like that in this world, your journey is far from over. Translate into English.